Hi YouTube. This past March, I traveled about 8.5 hours away from my home to a farm in the middle of nowhere to get certified in punch needle, a heritage craft hundreds of years old that until very recently was thought to have faded into obscurity. As a part of my certification program, and to get certified, I have to design and make a 2 by 3 foot rug which will be graded by punch needles, best of the best. My certification rug is the most technically dense rug I have ever made, and dare I say, one of my most ambitious pieces. It is the most important rug that I have made so far. So join me on my journey of designing this rug and watch as it develops into its final form. With my punch needle certification rug, I wanted to try my hand at some new subject matter. I love punching things like geometrics and florals, which I hope to incorporate some of into my rug, but I'd really like to try my hand at designing something with animals. My certification rug has to be an original design, and I had a ton of ideas for what I wanted to do. To sort my many ideas into something cohesive and usable, I mood boarded them. I've gotten really into mood boarding for design, and it was actually something that was recommended by my punch needle instructor, Simone. She said that looking at a lot of references was a good thing because it would help develop my design skills instead of just copying off of something. And you can bet that I had a lot of references. I had a whole Pinterest board dedicated to my certification rug with various images, color palettes, and decorative elements that I managed to lasso together into a pretty compelling mood board, I would say. I actually think that this mood board has a lot of similarities to the mood board I made for my garden pond rug. You can go check that video out if you want. But I think the garden pond rug has more general themes of nature with a cooler color palette, whereas my certification rug is also nature but leaning more towards like vintage elements as well as incorporating both warm and cool colors. But I digress. I drew up my pattern in Procreate and then I redrew it onto Adobe Illustrator so that I could scale it up without it getting pixelated. My pattern is the foundation of my rug, and I don't want anything messing it up. So what I ended up doing is going to Staples and getting it printed out full size onto poster paper. My next step was getting this pattern onto my monk's cloth. Now, monk's cloth frays a ton, and I absolutely could not have my certification rug fraying on me while I was working on it. So I used my sewing machine to sew a zigzag stitch around the monk's cloth. This is a great way to secure the edges of your fabric and a great alternative to using a serger. But I will say, a serger is more convenient, so I'll definitely use that when I get one. I'm also using a random thread color for the zigzag stitch because number one, I want to see that I'm actually getting that stitch in, and number two, what color I use doesn't matter. Once I hem my rug, I'll be cutting this excess monk's cloth off, so it doesn't matter. Though I will say that when I'm tracing a pattern to sell or gift to someone to use like in a kit or something, I like using a thread color that matches my fabric or just a nice aesthetic color. So there are many ways that you can trace your pattern onto monk's cloth. You can tape your fabric and pattern to a window and trace it that way, but my certification rug is 2 by 3 feet, so it would be a pain to get that taped onto any window. There is also the option of using a light table, but I don't have one of those. Which brings us to my makeshift option 3, using our glass coffee table and putting my ring light underneath it. This actually worked really well, I'm using an 8B pencil to do a preliminary tracing of my design onto my fabric, and then I went over it with a black Sharpie. As I've kind of established, foundations are key, and getting your fabric properly stretched onto your frame makes a huge difference. I'm really taking my time with this because I want this rug to be as perfect as possible. Luckily, my rug is a rectangle, which makes it way easier to stretch out onto my gripper frame because I have straight lines to show me if my fabric is warped. So let's start punching. I'm using a combination of the Craftsman and Oxford punch needles for my certification rug, which is not only allowed, but encouraged if you have a Craftsman. The corners of my rug are also one of the very few parts of my rug where I'm not using 100% wool rug yarn, which is also allowed, by the way. This is Drops Snow yarn, I believe, and this yarn is a blend of wool and alpaca. I wouldn't classify it as like a novelty yarn because novelty yarns tend to be a little bit weirder. But this yarn still adds a varied texture and feel to my certification rug, which is cool. Now, I'm missing a really important color for this section of my rug, and many other sections of it actually. I'm going to be using a pale variegated yellow yarn for the background here, but the exact color I want isn't available to purchase. So what I'm going to be doing is dyeing it. Now, dyeing wool yarn or anything made out of animal fiber requires acid dye. It comes in a tiny container in powdered form. Okay, folks, I'm only gonna say this once and it's for your own good, so please listen up. Do not breathe powdered dye in. It is toxic. I am absolutely not responsible if you don't heed my warnings. You should be handling powdered dyes using proper protective equipment in a well-ventilated area. I personally want to deal with powdered dyes as few times as possible because of the toxicity and because I don't want to measure micrograms of dye powder to get the same colors every time. It's annoying. I don't want to deal with it. So I'm using the woolly mason jar dye system to dye the yarns for my certification rug. The system basically involves making dye solutions using small amounts of dye powder and water and mixing certain amounts of them to guarantee the same colors every single time. I will link the woolly mason jar below if you want to go check them out. I highly recommend the system for any yarn and fiber enthusiasts wanting to get into dyeing. The first step in our dyeing process is prepping the yarn. This is Briggs & Little Super in the color washed white, I believe. I'm separating my skein here into smaller mini skeins so that I can do a bit of a test run with a smaller amount of yarn. This is my first time doing any yarn dyeing on my own, so I want to make sure that I'm not wasting an entire skein in case I mess up. I'm tying them with some leftover cotton twine so that they don't get tangled up. We're going to fill up a bucket with some warm water, add a little bit of dish soap to it, and dunk our mini yarn skeins right in. We're gonna leave these to soak for at least 30 minutes, maybe an hour. Pre-soaking your yarn before dyeing it is really important because it allows for the yarn to fully absorb the dye, like right into the core. Now, before we can dye anything, we need to make our dye solution. I'm all dripped out in my protective gear. We've got an apron, we've got our N95 mask, and we've got some gloves. I am absolutely not doing this in my kitchen, so we're gonna take this to my backyard and make our solution there. Now, this, in hindsight, was a little bit of a mistake because it was a little bit windy, but the solution ended up being good, so it's fine. Something else I should mention is that whatever you use for dyeing, like pots, measuring cups, spoons, etc., should not be used for cooking ever again, even if you wash it. My tools are really cheap from Walmart and Dollarama, and they work great. You don't have to spend a lot of money on fancy dye pots or whatever. So we're gonna add some water into our pot and bring it to just below a simmer. And then we'll add some vinegar and some dye solution. Why do we need vinegar? Well, the vinegar allows for the dye to bind to the yarn. That's why it's called acid dye. So we're gonna drop our yarn into this. If you want a fully solid color, you wanna stir it a bunch, but I wanted a variegated yellow, so I'm only stirring a little bit. I'm going to cover this up, turn off my stove here, and wait. I know my yarn will be done when the water is clear again. This means that all the dye has been absorbed. I can then wash my newly dyed yarn in some warm water to remove any loose color and prevent bleeding, and then let it dry. At this point, some of you are gonna ask me, Vrinda, what happens to the dye water that you have left over? And this, my friends, is an excellent question. We can neutralize this water by adding a little bit of baking soda and turning it into gray water. I forget what the actual definition of gray water is, but I remember that while you can't drink or cook with it, you can safely put it down the sink or water your plants with it, which is cool. And let me show you how my yarn turned out, okay? So I experimented with slightly different dye amounts here, and the one on the right is perfect, chef's kiss. This will be the color that I used for the background of my certification rug. The one on the left is a little darker than I would have liked, but there is a different part of my rug where I do need a darker yellow, and I think this might do the trick. I started by punching just the very corner of the background, but the background overall was one of my favorite parts to punch. Like, there's something so relaxing about the uniform stitches, all in straight lines, perfectly stacked like bricks. I love it. I love it. This is one of the great things about Punch Needle. You get to see the progression of your work really quickly. I'm also gonna get started on my frame here with the same yarn I used for the corners of my rug. We're gonna use multiple strands though. I kind of want my frame to have a watercolor type effect where it's intermingled in a way with the background, and I think using multiple strands of this finer yarn really does the trick. I also want this frame to have a bevel to it, so I'm using multiple sizes of the Oxford punch needle to give it that 3D effect, which you'll see at the end of this video. So let's get started on what I describe as the focal point of this rug. So my rug has a traveling cottagecore elephant. I say cottagecore because of the bandana. Now, this elephant is interesting because for this rug, we are going to be using a technique called sculpting. You may have already heard me talking about this technique in some of my other videos, but sculpting is basically just creating sculpted shapes on your work, either by punching your loops and then clipping them all to make them fuzzy, like Waldoboro style rugs, or just by punching using punch needles with different loop heights. And the exciting thing is that we're going to be using both of these techniques for my certification rug. So what I'm doing now is punching the more detailed tie portion, and you can see I'm using the darker yellow yarn I dyed for this and leaving it unclipped. I plan on sculpting the bandana, but only by using different loop heights with no clipping. I'm going to start off by punching one of the front legs of the elephant here. I believe I'm using loop heights 8 and 9 on the Craftsman punch needle. So what we've done here is we did the first outline row of stitches for the elephant leg. For sculpting, you're gonna wanna go in after every single row of stitches you make and clip the loops. If you don't do that, and let's say you punch everything in and clip a clump of loops at the same time, it'll show and it won't look good. There are a lot of debates as to which type of scissors work best for sculpting. Personally, I use a combination of embroidery scissors and these bent handle scissors. The bent handle scissors do a great job of getting that nice, clean, sculpted shape, while the embroidery scissors even out your clipped loops pretty well. I'm gonna move on to working on the body of the elephant next, and to do this, I had to punch in the outline of the bandana as well as the shadow of the elephant ear as kind of space keepers in a way. Y'all have absolutely no idea how long it took me to work on this elephant. We had quite a few months to work on our certification rug alongside our other homework, and the elephant probably took up at least a third of that time for me. Because the thing is, I hand punch every single loop into my fabric and then snip each loop one by one, and then use scissors to sculpt those clipped loops into the exact shape I want. It's a very detailed and tedious process and really, really stressful, which is why I didn't record most of it. And also why I alternated between punching the elephant and punching other parts of my certification rug. However, to punch the other parts of my certification rug, I need to dye more yarns, which means making more dye solutions. I won't really get into the specifics of making these dye solutions, but I will say that I moved my dyeing setup into the garage instead of my backyard, which was a huge upgrade because I could shield myself from the elements, as well as the curious eyes of my neighbors who probably thought I was cooking up something illegal in my backyard.
Have to cook more, a lot more.
While I was attending my in-person punch needle certification lessons, I had to bring a draft of my certification rug. Literally a full-sized 2x3 sketch of what I planned on doing. We had the opportunity to give feedback on each other's rugs, and everyone loved mine, which was great. They did say that it might be worth looking into experimenting with different shapes for the background, which I thought was good and reasonable feedback. It would be nice to try something like that out and see how it goes. And so I tried experimenting with circles, but honestly, I just didn't like the look of it on the front. It looked too busy, and my rug was busy enough as is, so I switched to straight lines, which looked way better in my opinion. I'm including these clips in my video because everyone seems to think that I'm some sort of creative genius and all of my work turns out perfect all the time. That is very far from the truth. I mess up a bunch and go through a lot of trial and error to get my work to a place where I'm satisfied with it. I am going to finish punching this elephant once and for all and punch the head. The more I'm talking, the more I realize that the words that I'm saying sound so horrible out of context. I love animals. I'm a vegetarian. No elephants were harmed in the making of this video. I want to fill in as much of this section as possible so that when I move my rug on my frame, I won't have to move it back to that spot again. It's important to steam press your rug before moving it on your frame. I normally don't do this in my regular punch needle work, but I feel like it makes moving your rug around way easier. So I think I'm gonna keep on doing it in the future. I'm also going to start sculpting the elephant head. The entire elephant is actually too big to fit on my frame at once, so I had to move it before actually doing the sculpting on the head. I have returned with lots and lots of dyed yarn. I wanted to get as much dyeing done at once as possible so that I won't have to go back and dye more yarn. I can now get started on some different parts of my rug. I can also pick up some parts of my rug that I left off, like this frame. I left lots of long yarn tails when I worked on the first section of my rug so that I wouldn't have to stagger my punching when I moved it around on my frame. The reason, by the way, why we stagger our punch needle stitches is simple. When you're punching something bigger on a smaller frame, staggering your punching helps it blend in better and makes it more difficult for people to tell that you've moved it around on your frame. I'm also getting started on some of the greenery on this rug with some of the grass on the front and a layer of the background hills. Look at how nice this is! I'm telling you, it was just as nice to punch as it is to look at. Let me break my silence and show you some really interesting punch needle techniques. This is fine shading, also known as finger shading, which is a traditional technique used in punch needle. Using different values of the same color, you can make really realistic gradients in shading. It's normally used for flowers and leaves, which you can see an example of here with these fine shaded leaves I'm working on. You can probably tell by now that my punch needle rug is chock full of techniques. I like to think of this rug as a graduate thesis. It's a way to demonstrate everything you've learned from the basics to the more advanced things, and doing this in an original way and presenting an original idea. Obviously, a rug like this requires a lot of planning. I basically had my colors planned out to the T. Folks, let me tell you, this is the most math and science I have used in years. Years! Because I had to, number one, calculate the amount of yarn I would need for each section of my rug. Number two, measure very specific amounts of dye solutions to get the exact color combinations I wanted. And number three, measure out the correct amount of dye solution to add for specific amounts of yarn, because if I didn't, my yarn would turn out too light or too dark, which is a no-no. But try as I may to be a STEM girly, I still undercalculated the amount of yarn I would need. So we have to dye some more. I will say that most of my yarn amounts were spot on, but there were just a few that were a little bit off. And unfortunately for me, the colors I need to dye more of are the darkest and the bluest. Why is this a problem, you might ask? Let me explain to you what I've learned about yarn dyeing over these past few months. Lesson number one, the lighter the color you want to dye, the quicker the process will be. Pretty obvious lesson, right? Because darker yarn means more color, which will take longer to absorb. Lesson number two, colors absorb at different rates. Wool yarn will absorb yellow lickety-split, okay? Which is why I'm super glad that I used it as the background for my rug. But anything with blue, that'll take forever, no matter how light the color is. This yarn right here is a medium-ish green, aka equal parts blue and yellow, but if you take a look here, the yarn has absorbed all of the yellow and there's only blue left. And the blue will stay there for hours. Hours! So, final lesson, if you're dyeing yarn and there's blue involved, prepare for an overnight absorption period. Anyone who works with yarn or fabric will know the game of yarn or thread chicken. When you have just enough yarn to make whatever it is you need to make. And I did end up taking some measurement W's because I was able to finish off this far mountain right here with an uncumbersome amount of yarn left over, which is fantastic. So while we're on the conversation of yarn amounts, I believe the yellow background of this rug used up the most yarn, but it was so easy to punch. Look at how satisfying it is to punch in perfect straight lines, stacking each stitch like bricks. I love it. Now, you know how I explained how we punch a rug on a small frame and move it around in a way where we don't have to come back to a section of it after we're done punching it? Well, so I didn't really do that. Okay, I did, but I'm coming back to this section here because I want to repunch the water, that's all. I didn't like the way it looked before, and moving your rug to a fully punched section on your frame is a challenge, but it's not impossible. You just want to cover your gripper strips with some old towels and make sure that it's centered on your frame. Once you have it centered, you can just remove the towels and stretch each section once. Only once, and as tight as you can, because if you fiddle around with it any more than that, your yarn might end up snagging, which sucks. Once I punched the water, I was done punching my certification rug. But we're not done because we have to do some final snipping and poking. I say final because this is a part of the process that I omitted quite a bit of throughout this video, but I did do it as I punched because it would be an absolute nightmare for me to snip and poke every single loose end of this 2x3 foot rug. We're gonna use a sticky roller here to remove any lint on this rug and give it a good steam press to flatten it out for hemming. So we're marking 2 inches out of the sides of this rug and about 3/4 of an inch out of the corners, and we're gonna cut out our rug right on these lines. Hemming requires a lot of pressing and even more pinning. We're pressing in all of the sides and all of the corners and folding the sides in once again so that we don't have a visible raw hem. We're gonna pin all of this and start hemming. I'm using strings of monk's cloth here to hand sew this hem, and I use strings of monk's cloth because they blend into the fabric and they're really strong. This hem is sewed very precisely. Each stitch is small and barely visible, and all of the stitches are equally spaced. See, this is what makes slow crafts like punch needles so special. A lot of people ask me why I put so much effort into a part of the rug that people won't see. This is probably because of things like TikTok and other social media that confuse people into believing that punch needle and tufting are the same thing, which they totally aren't. I personally consider tufting the fast fashion of crafting and a shoddy imitation, and quite frankly, like a mockery of the punch needle and hooked rug work people have been doing for centuries. Okay, I'm veering off topic here, but let me know in the comments if I should make a video on punch needle versus tufting and the gripes I have with tufting. Convince me to unleash my fury. But anyways, people will see. I can 100% guarantee that anyone who receives a good quality, authentic punch needle rug will show off the back to everyone they can, because it's great when something looks good on the front, but even more great when it looks just as great on the back. Furthermore, hand sewing your hem allows a rug maker to repair it if needed, because all they need to do is cut the hem stitches, repunch whatever needs to be repunched, and resew the hem. Sometimes punch needlers will even tuck extra yarns into the hem so that damaged parts of the rug can be repaired with a matching yarn. kind of like how clothes sometimes include like an extra button or two. Now that I'm done hemming, what we're gonna do is we're gonna do a final press of my certification rug and do a final cleanup. We're gonna go over the entire rug with a sticky roller and my electric lint remover to make absolutely sure that this rug is clean. And now we are done. It is time to send it to my punch needle instructor. This rug, along with some other homework, will be evaluated by my instructor and other Oxford certified punch needle instructors. They're gonna look at everything I submit with a critical eye to make sure that I am qualified to actually teach people punch needle if I wanted to. So we're gonna pack this up and mail it. Okay, so I'm sitting in my car. We are outside the post office, and in this box is, well, everything I've been working on for the past 6 months. I really want to show me handing the package to the post office person, but like I would totally get doxxed. And you know, once I get doxxed, who knows what'll happen? Like, what if you guys all start sending me money? Actually, that's not a bad idea. Send me money and gifts. That'd be fantastic. Okay, no, we're not gonna do that. I'm gonna go hand it in, and well, that's that. And so I waited and waited and waited for my rug and other certification homework to be evaluated. Soon enough, I received all of my homework back in the mail and a phone call from my punch needle instructor. She said that everyone loved my certification rug. They were incredibly impressed with the detail and the cleanness of the stitches, as well as the fact that I hand-dyed a majority of my yarns. This, in my opinion, is incredibly high praise coming from her because she is one of the most talented punch needlers I have ever met. And so, without further ado, it's time for all of you to see my certification rug. Okay, wait, no, it's way too big to fit on camera here. Let's change our setup a little bit. I present to you the Expedition, my original punch needle certification rug. Truly, the rug to end all rugs. So as you can see here, I've used all of the Oxford punch needle sizes to create a sense of depth. You can see my hand-dyed yarn in the majority of this piece, as well as the various techniques I've utilized. So we've got fine shading, we've got sculpting, we've got multi-strand punching. It's all there. And if you take a look at the back, it's properly hemmed and looks just as good as the front. You can't even see the hem stitches I made, that's how small they are. This rug was hundreds of hours of work. And I am so excited to announce that I'm certified. I am now an Oxford certified punch needle instructor, and I am currently the youngest in the world to be certified, confirmed by my instructor Simone and Amy Oxford herself. Funny story, when we were in person for my certification lessons, we were talking about me being the youngest person to get certified, and apparently I'm younger than Amy Oxford herself when she started teaching punch needle. Not by much, she started at 25 and I'm 24, but it's still pretty cool and interesting. I'm also supposed to get a certificate and some other fun stuff now that I'm done, but those will take a while to get here. Once I do get them, you can bet I'm gonna post about it on my Instagram. This kind of feels like an awards ceremony, so some thanks are definitely due. Huge thank you to my instructor Simone. She didn't even know who I was when I emailed her wanting to be certified, and yet she welcomed me into her home and studio and really helped me throughout this process and taught me a lot. And exciting news, she is the new dean of the Oxford Rug Cooking School. So some of you may have the opportunity to learn from her in a broader capacity as well. She's the best, you won't regret it. I'd also like to thank my certification classmates. They were the best people to learn with. And I'd like to thank my friends and family for accepting that this whole rug thing is kind of my life now. And finally, I'd like to thank you. I started this channel as a creative outlet, and also because my friends have been telling me to do YouTube for years now, and I see a lot of personal value in creating content I enjoy and creating content about slow, authentic craftsmanship in a fast-paced world of disposable products, revolving trends, and keeping up with the algorithm. It is crazy to me that over 200 of you have found your way to my little corner of YouTube and enjoyed and valued me and my work so much to subscribe. It's honestly mind-blowing. So thank you so much for all of your support. I am very, very grateful. I'm really excited to keep making more videos. For me, Punch Needle has given me a sense of purpose and direction that I previously lacked. And I can't wait to show you all of the things I make in the future. Thanks for watching.